Hi, I'm Craig and I'm the co-host of the MQ Open Mind podcast. On behalf of my co-host, Professor Rory O'Connor and myself, thank you so much for watching the first season. We hope you are able to gain a further insight into the world of mental health research and learn a little bit about yourself and those around you. For this special episode of Open Mind, we've compiled the most memorable moments into one episode. Open Mind will return this year for a second season, and we hope to see you again for more lived experience stories and more mental health research. For the first episode of Open Mind, we spoke to journalist and podcaster Gemma Styles about doing good, the impact of social media on mental health, and raising money with sunglasses.
I just wonder whether, because you've have talked openly about your own experiences of own mental health challenges. What good coping strategies do you use, or what do you think is helpful for you when you are feeling overwhelmed or stressed or feeling low or whatever it might be?
I always find that really hard to pinpoint, and I think to boil it down, I suppose the main thing is kind of being aware and kind of trying to practice the sort of mindfulness in terms of being aware of my own mental and physical sort of needs on any particular day and in a particular moment. So I feel like even with things like depression and anxiety, when you have things coexisting, there's sometimes, there's a bit of a tussle, and on one day you might need to take things very slowly. At another point you think, no, it's actually going to be really good for my mental health today if I get out of the house and go for a walk. And just I wish I could give a more structured sort of schedule or a set of rules for exactly what I would do, but to be honest, it's kind of just trying to pay attention to myself at any particular time. And yeah, unfortunately, I don't always have a good solid answer for it. Sometimes it is just waiting for the storm to pass kind of thing, which hopefully one day I might pick up even more coping strategies. But
I think that's such an important message, though, because there is no one answer. And I think that's a great point is it within each one of us, right? What works to manage our mental health in one day may not work the next day. And as you say, often if we've got the coexistence, or whatever, in psychological terms, we talk about the comorbidity of depressive symptoms and symptoms of anxiety. And as you rightly point out, how you maybe deal with how you're feeling anxious is very different from how you would deal with feeling symptoms of depression. But I think that's a really important message to get out there to people who are listening, is not putting pressure on. You have to do. So some people, mindfulness might work. Exercise might work, medication might work, psychological therapies might work, and it's just finding your own path. And I think it is. But that's a brilliant point about you said about being sensitive to be in tune with our own needs. And then once we're in tune with our own needs, and you're much more likely to get your needs met if you're aware of what those are.
Do you ever feel like you have to push yourself to do things sometimes?
Kind of. And I think that is an interesting conversation that I've picked up, that definitely I've seen other people talking about online before. So the kind of idea that there's such a thing as being too gentle with ourselves.
Yeah.
That then sometimes you kind of have to try and push yourself to do things that are going to be beneficial for your mental health. I do think that's a tricky one, because in my personal experience of depression in particular, it's just such a hard thing to do sometimes. Like, the most frustrating thing to me, I think, is when someone will kind of try and push advice at you that usually starts with, well, why don't you just ... And that to me is always the most frustrating, because if it was as simple as just saying, well, I'll just do that then, you would have done it already and you wouldn't be kind of in that position. It's just, I think it's quite difficult to make yourself do those kind of self-care activities for your own mental health sometimes.
Yeah.
Not that we shouldn't do them, but I don't think it's always I don't mean to make it sound as simple as, oh, well, you go for a walk, you do this, do that, because it's actually not always as easy as just saying, do it.
I guess because as someone with anxiety, there's sometimes when I want to do something and I feel like maybe this will help with my confidence, maybe help with my anxiety, but I don't know if it's a tightrope. Is it going to make it worse or is it going to make it better? And you never know until afterwards.
Yeah, that anxiety is a tricky one for that, I think. I try especially with work things, I've had to try and sort of have the conversation. Basically, for me, I feel like whatever I'm doing, I'm going to be anxious about it to a certain extent, which I've accepted about myself. But I've tried to kind of look at it now as, am I anxious about it because I want to do it and I want it to go well? Or am I anxious about it because I actually don't want to do it? Because I feel like they can be quite different things. But also trying to weigh up whether it's worth it, if you know what I mean. Because for certain activities or social things or whatever it might be, if you know that you're not going to sleep properly for 2 weeks beforehand because it's going to cause you so much stress, sometimes that's a consideration for me. I think weighing up exactly how much the sort of risk benefit scenario is it's a difficult one.
I suppose that just makes me think of, so when we think of physical health, right, we all know we have a limited capacity in our physical health. I can only run as fast or for as long or do whatever exercise for a certain period of time. And we all accept that, right? We all have our limits and our boundaries and our, but it's less likely we think about that with regard to mental health. And what you're illustrating is absolutely right, which is, so that if you think of those, your example there of the 2 weeks in advance of maybe some big event or some big thing. So is it that all the potential feeling exhausted, whatever the complex emotions you might feel for that, and then the trade-off of whatever it going well or getting whatever the outcome of it is, but if by the time you get to the event you're so exhausted because you just run out of steam, and I think that is an important one to ask yourselves. Is it worth doing it? Is it trade-off? Do you get the rebound effect or do you get the refill? Because we are only all limited in our sort of mental health. We only have a certain amount of energy in our mental health. And I just think I don't think as a society we do enough by trying to weigh those up, because we're driven for doing certain things and we get rewards from that. But actually, what is the potential consequences on our mental health? Or we would talk about this sort of in a stress context, we would talk about the wear and tear hypothesis. If you were continually stressing your body out psychologically, never mind physically, your body just breaks down over time, and you just need to give each other time to recover.
Yeah, I think an important part of that is also thinking about, whatever the thing is that's causing you stress, is what and who are you doing it for? Because if it's something that is going to cause you stress, but it's something that genuinely you want to do or you want to overcome or you want to experience, then great. But if it's something that also you're giving that much energy to, and it's really going to be that much of a drain on how you feel over an extended period of time, and actually you're only doing it because somebody else expects you to, or you feel like you should, and you feel all this sort of outer pressure, then that, for me, when you start trying to weigh things up, it starts to tip the other way, and that it's just for your own personal resources, it's not really probably worth it.
Yeah, and why, it's who you're doing it for. So, in one of the other podcasts, Craig and I have talked about social perfectionism, and then I'm high in social perfectionism, so I'm driven. So I'm hyper concerned about what others think or expect of me, and I continually think I'm letting others down. So but it's not good for your mental health, right? So it's finding some happy medium, because you're just driven doing stuff, and it's just because you want to meet the expectations of others, which of course on one level is admirable, and you want to be altruistic and supportive and so on. But there's that, again, it's this fine line. I don't think we're as good at treading that line. Craig, did you talk about that? So we mentioned the treading the line thing. Yeah. I think there is something about that, which I think we, as a society, we need to do better at, especially I think as young people come through now with different pressures than certainly when I was a kid.
Over 1 million people in the UK have an eating disorder. We spoke to Emmerdale actress and eating disorder campaigner Gemma Oaten to talk about the problems of getting a diagnosis, the severity of eating disorders, and how to support survivors.
My backstory really is at the age of 10 years old, it felt like out of nowhere developed anorexia. And before that point, I had been just, your normal kid on the block, not in that pop group sense, but, just very, very content and very happy and bit of a tomboy, larking out with the lads. And I was never really the girl in the gingham dress with the pigtails, but I was so so happy, and my mum and dad amazing. You know, my brother, I love him, but he did my head in. My two sisters, you know, always fighting, but love them to bits. Like, but in terms of the family dynamic, like there was nothing untoward, you know, going on. But what did happen was in the playground, and I kind of went from that tomboy to starting to blossom, for want of a better word, into a young woman, and along with that came the green-eyed monster, and the bullying began, and I remember very quickly, it was like, in hindsight, I didn't know it then. I couldn't articulate and understand what was going on then, but in hindsight, I believe strongly that my eating disorder developed because I couldn't control what people were saying or doing to me, but I could control an element of what went inside me. And at that point, when it was the anorexia, it was like the smaller I was, the safer I was. And mum and dad, because we were so close, they kind of spotted the warning signs very, very quickly, God bless them, and took me to the doctor.
Was this still around 10, 11?
Yeah, this is all about 10 years old. As I say, because there was such a big age gap with my siblings, I think there was like 10 years, it never felt like I was an only child, but I was with mum and dad constantly, 24/7. They were like my best buddies. And because they were so hands-on, it was very quick in terms of them going, we know something's not right, Gemma, let's talk about this. And that could have saved my life, but unfortunately the doctor turned us away because I wasn't low enough in weight to have a problem. Cut to a year later, I was given 24 hours to live and admitted to a children's psychiatric unit and put on bed rest, and that became the narrative of my life for 13 years. So in answer to your question, the reason I do what I do in terms of I'm the chief exec of Seed Eating Disorder Support Services. That was the charity that my parents set up because there was no support out there for us when we were going through it. And fortunately, I'm now well, and I've taken on that full sort of journey of hope and take on the baton from mum and dad, and I'm the one who's getting the grey hairs now.
I don't make grey hair to me, certainly.
Die, babe, die. Don't die.
No, but to come back then, so I mean, that's what you say, that's starting very young for the onset, obviously, of the symptomatology and your own struggles. So you're saying that, so were you then in and out of hospital then?
Yes, for 13 years. I nearly lost my life 4 times over that period, and it would be a constant cycle, Rory, of going into hospital or going to an eating disorder unit, being fed up, as in, you know, being refed, and being able to get to a point where I was medically safe. But what happened was, by doing that, this was never addressed. So it was kind of like they were just papering over the cracks, and that was it constantly. It was like a roller coaster. And I remember my dad did a talk recently at one of our it was our 21st, celebrating our 21st year last year as a charity, and dad did a talk to the audience, and he said his daughter had a death sentence, and well, you know, he said it's like his daughter was in prison and he didn't know whether she would be on the death sentence, whether she'd get parole, or whether it would be a life sentence. That was basically me behind bars within my own mind for all that time, which is just, to hear a parent say that is so sad, but it just uncovers the magnitude of how devastating a mental health illness, an eating disorder, can be.
Well, as we know, I mean, the statistics are utterly heartbreaking as well. The number of people who obviously lose their lives to eating disorders. I think it's, and all the mental illnesses out there, is the most devastating. So it's amazing that you obviously your brushes with death, but thankfully are still here. So I'm just, so with that young age, so Gemma, were you able to make sense of what was going on? You talked about your head there, whatever. So like 11 or 12, and like we understood why you were in hospital, or?
I felt like I was going, because I had no knowledge of eating disorders before that point. I think I'd seen a short documentary once, and it was filmed through the eyes of the girl who was struggling, and I remember saying to my dad, why would somebody choose not to eat, Dad? Like, what is she doing? You know, and I, like, that was all I had seen. So I wasn't aware of mental health really at that young age. And I wasn't aware of what an eating disorder was. So I just internalized it and just believed my own thinking that I was fat, I was disgusting. I looked in a mirror and I just felt so grotesque 24/7. All I would think about was how to disappear, how to avoid food. All I would, just strange, not strange to me then, but like constantly like holding myself and hunched up, like I literally would press my stomach to try and make it smaller. Like that is how much I hated myself. So no, at that point I had no understanding of what was happening. And it was, I think for me, what was sad about the whole thing was that, and bear in mind, I'm 38 now. So this is like 27 years ago. And some things have changed, but not a lot, in my opinion. What was sad was that the healthcare professionals didn't understand it either. Because I know early intervention is key, and awareness and education is paramount to saving lives, and it just wasn't there.
Yeah, no, I'm going to come back to that because I'm really, I mean, the work that you're doing with SEED, because that's part, isn't it, about awareness raising, supporting families and so on. And I want to come back to the access to healthcare stuff. But I'm just curious, so just before we do that, if it's okay, so do you, in your experience, and do you think that the stigma around eating disorders has got any less? Like, I'm just thinking now over that, you've this journey now of over 20 years. What do you think about that?
It definitely has. It definitely has. If you know, when my recovery began, within 2 years I'd got to drama school, and within 3 or 4 years I was cast in one of the biggest soaps in the UK, Emmerdale. Now, at that point, I was being, I wouldn't say hounded, but everyone wanted to know who the new girl was. And they did some digging and discovered that Marja and my mum had an MBE. Why did she have an MBE? For services to eating disorders. Why did she get that? Oh, because Gemma had an eating disorder. And I remember when they first approached me to talk about an eating disorder and how petrified I was and how scared and how I was worried that people would view me differently. And actually, if you'd have said to me like 10 years ago, like that I would be the CEO of my parents' charity and I would be talking about this left, right and centre and knocking on doors to make sure I was heard and shouting louder than I've ever shouted in my life, I wouldn't have believed you. So yeah, massively. There's still the stigma around the conversation is breaking, but where we're lacking is the treatment and support. So it's all well and good that more and more people are reaching out for help, but what's not great is that help's not there.
In 2022, the theme for Mental Health Awareness Week was loneliness. We sat down with Associate Professor in Psychiatry, Dr. Alexandra Pitman, to talk about loneliness, the importance of inclusive research, and enjoying solitude.
But the heart of this podcast is really maybe what we mean by loneliness, because I think we all have an intuitive understanding what we mean by loneliness, and there's loneliness and there's social isolation. So maybe could you tell us a bit about how you define in your research or in your clinical work, how do you define loneliness, and then how is that different or similar to it being socially isolated?
Well, I'm part of a network of researchers and policymakers and practitioners and people with lived experience of loneliness, and we're part of the Loneliness and Social Isolation and Mental Health Research Network. And so in all the work that we've done, we've tended to conceptualize loneliness probably most simply in terms of the subjective feeling of your social relationships just not being up to scratch, not being what you would desire. And that is in contrast to the objective number of social contacts you have, which better describes the concept of social isolation. And I think that people who tend to be very socially unisolated, so they've got lots of friends and family, find it really difficult to name their loneliness, because they can't conceive that it's possible that you could have all these friends and family and yet feel so lonely. And actually, that's probably even more stigmatizing for them, because they think, nobody's going to take this seriously. They'll point out how many friends I've got, whether in my day-to-day, face-to-face encounters or my friends on social media. How can they possibly understand how I feel? And yet it's quite possible to feel really lonely when you're surrounded by people. And in fact, in the qualitative data that we've analysed in our group, we've often observed that it's when people have loads and loads of people around them. They might be at a party or in a pub or in their hall of residence, surrounded by people, and yet their loneliness is really compounded by this awareness of all these people around them who could theoretically assuage their feelings of loneliness, but somehow it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. With the rise of like social media, where people feel more connected with one another, do you feel that loneliness is getting worse?
Well, I think everybody thinks it's getting worse. And we hear people talk about the epidemic of loneliness. And I do really struggle with that concept. And I don't use that term, because I think whilst we all think it's getting worse, we really do have to attend to what rigorous research studies tell us. And so whilst there are studies which have tracked, particularly during COVID, levels of loneliness, there are some very different findings. So recently, a study that your group did, Rory, showed that in a very mixed, in a sample of very mixed age groups, overall levels of loneliness didn't change over the COVID pandemic period. But if you looked at specific age groups, you could see there were very different patterns by age group and by time. And then there are other studies which perhaps looked at specific age groups. There's one study I've read recently, for example, and that showed that loneliness in older adults had increased over the COVID pandemic. And that was particularly the case for people living alone, and that makes sense, and for women. But, there's been some particularly interesting findings in young people. And we know from a recent systematic review, actually, which looked at estimates of the prevalence of loneliness in young people across countries across the world over a long period of time, well predating the pandemic. And this shows that loneliness is increasing in young people in countries across the world. So this is something which is happening in that age group. But when you look at the COVID period specifically, there is a sense from the data that actually kids who were old enough to have their own devices, to be socially connected in an online world, were better off than younger kids who didn't have that agency in terms of connecting with their friends. So they were really quite isolated, whereas their older siblings actually did quite well, because they had that outlet beyond the family home where really things were very, very limited. So I think there are very, very different patterns in different age groups. I think, Rory, your study showed that there were no differences by ethnicity. You had some interesting patterns in your study, and definitely people with mental health problems had far higher prevalence of loneliness. And we specifically focused on this group, our loneliness network, during the pandemic, because we did some interviews specifically with people with pre-existing mental health problems, and we asked them about their experience of loneliness. And it was really, really striking findings, because these were people who, they weren't so adept at adjusting to the new online world. They really, really struggled with that. Their anxieties around health were, really, really augmented by the sort of general, panic about the infectious agents they might encounter when they're out in public. They really, really felt forgotten by the policy community. It seemed to be all about, kind of public outrage over the new onset of mental health problems in previously healthy people, whereas they were thinking, hang on, we've had mental health problems for years and no one really seems to care about us. And they had, they were cut off from their friends, they were cut off from mental health services, which they perceived to be woefully inadequate. And the online services that were put in their place were really not good enough to meet their needs, as well as a complete shutdown of a lot of services they'd relied on in the voluntary sector community. So it really, really was a rough ride for that group of people. And I think we've tried to really prioritize that group in our research, because they are tending to be forgotten in other pieces of research, which tend to focus on new onset anxiety and depression.
No, I think you made such an important point about, well, the broader point is we're not all in this pandemic together. We never have been. And there's lots of communities and individuals who've been left behind. And I think the people with pre-existing mental health problems, and all the data we've got and seeing other countries across, not just in the UK, across the world, I mean the huge impact on people's mental health. Doesn't matter which indicator. If you have pre-existing mental health problems, much more lonely, much more likely to have depressive symptoms, much more likely to be suicidal, and so on. But the thing that struck us when we were looking at our more recent data, so we've been tracking, Craig, for your benefit, we've been tracking the mental health and well-being of a sample of the UK since COVID began. And absolutely, Alexandra, as you say, that the older adults, we didn't see the initial phases of the pandemic, we actually relatively stable were the levels of loneliness. Now, young people were reporting high levels of loneliness. People with pre-existing mental health problems, women, people from more socially disadvantaged backgrounds, all the stuff we would have predicted because of obviously pre-existing inequalities just being exacerbated. But there is certainly some signals as the pandemic has gone along, older adults are starting to report, it's still much lower than younger people, starting to report higher levels of loneliness. So I think it highlights that group again, another group who've been overlooked. So I think it's so important, this work, and it's great to see that you're trying to not just do the quantitative survey-based work, but really trying to get to the nuts and bolts and how these people are experiencing loneliness. But the number of times I've heard that line you said about, people with pre-existing mental health problems going, what? Oh, hold on, hello, we've been here for a long, long time experiencing these difficulties, and it's only now there's this light shone on it because of this outrage, as you say, of the pandemic. So I think that really reminds us of that we have a long way to go in terms of achieving anything to do with parity of esteem or the like. But can I just bring you back, Alexandra, just to that? So we've made the distinction between obviously loneliness and sort of social isolation, or being surrounded by people it doesn't protect. I wonder then, so if somebody was to say to you, and this is a wee bit unfair, I think, but if somebody was to say to you, right, Alexandra Pitman, how do we solve loneliness, right? And I know it'd be tailored, I know it's a very naive question, but actually it's a question psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health professionals are asked all the time. So how would you go about solving this problem of loneliness? Because I agree, it's not an epidemic. I don't think that's helpful.
I mean, there's so many ways of coming at this. And I think that, first of all, you have to think about the approach you take. Are you taking a psychological approach and trying to address cognitions? Or are you taking a social approach and thinking about the opportunities available to one? Or are you thinking of a combination of the two? And given that we don't really know whether either or work particularly well, we don't really know if they work in combination. So we're really in the very early stages of understanding what works. And there's some really good systematic reviews coming out at the moment that start to give us a sense that it's probably quite helpful to target cognitions. And actually, you could argue that you need to do that in order to make meaningful changes to their, social networks. But the other key question is, you may come up with this wonderful intervention with really fabulous, trial evidence to support its effectiveness. But if nobody wants it, that was all a complete waste of money. And this comes back to the stigma of loneliness, because if I'm trying to entice you into my kind of anti-loneliness intervention, there's a lot of stuff on the tin that's really kind of not very attractive here. And this is really the case for young people, and for whom loneliness is probably most stigmatizing. And so that's why we've been trying to do studies with young people to ask them, what would you actually want? And we're actually recruiting for a study at the moment, and that is involving a researcher interviewing young people. And initially, interestingly, we were planning to do it as focus groups, and it was really difficult to recruit to that. And I think that says a lot about how uncomfortable people feel about discussing these things in a group. So now we're doing it as face-to-face interviews to find out what people would actually like. And we're getting the sense that badging things as an anti-loneliness intervention is really not going to bring people in. And offering things as a universal intervention, so for all young people in a class, to help them, reframe the way they think about their own loneliness or other people who are socially isolated or who appear lonely. That's probably a better approach than trying to target the people who feel lonely. Now, there is one benefit, I would say, of the period we've just been through during COVID, is that it has possibly destigmatized loneliness, because so many people have really felt lonely and bereft of certain social connections. So I think that has tended to destigmatize being able to describe or be aware of one's own loneliness, and also identify someone who might be in need of interventions. But I do think we need to continue to understand what will work for specific ethnic minority groups, for specific age groups, for specific genders, because otherwise we're at the risk of producing or investing in interventions designed for everybody that aren't really going to help people that much.
In this special episode, we spoke to dancers AJ and Curtis Pritchard, actress Linda Lusardi, and MQ ambassador and MQ Open Mind returning guest Gemma Styles about what questions we would like mental health research to answer.
Curtis,
Yes.
Do you have any coping mechanisms or strategies for when you're in a stressful situation? I know you spoke about meditation.
Yeah, it's that is one of the biggest things. And I do something called power stances as well, actually, to be fair. So if I'm ever going to go into a big speech, if I've got a big group of people in front of me, or if I'm going into anywhere where I need to feel confident and powerful, I do a couple of different things with power stances. And they're simple things. I'll stand up and I'll do one for you. So literally it is stand with your legs apart.
2 days, wasn't it?
Yeah, we've been teaching this to uni students. So this is one power stance, exactly like this. Just stand like that for a little bit. Shoulders back, chin up, and this makes you feel confident and powerful. And this is one of the biggest problems with today, at the age and everything that we do. We're all on phones all the time, and we're like this. Mm-hmm. This is a negative power stance. So naturally, our body is in a stress position, a depressed position. So this is why I always like to do these power stances before doing anything. It's a great way to just open yourself up, drop everything back. And this is another one, just this position. Stay like that for a minute, and you'll just feel a little bit more open and ready to accomplish and do whatever you want. So that's one of my mechanisms. And the other is meditation. Clears my brain, brings all of my thoughts together and my emotions together. So therefore I can just pick out my thoughts, pick out my emotions, however I need them to be. So it makes me control myself in a way.
When you say meditation, how does one meditate?
So I've done a couple of different things, to be fair. How I first started meditating was I never did any guided stuff or anything. I literally lay on my bed and I just focused on my breathing. And I closed my eyes and I looked at, so when you close your eyes, it's just a darkness in front of your eyes. I tried to focus on that darkness. So not saying dark as in like horrible and grungy things. It was just black behind your eyes. So I just focused my mind on that. Breathed in through my nose as long as I could, just kept breathing in. And I would just breathe out as long as I possibly could, just focusing on that. Whenever my mind wandered, I would just bring it back to right behind my eyes, to that darkness. And it just focused my mind and it stopped it from overthinking or being worried about anything. It just brings you back down, and then you can accomplish it and go for whatever you want to. That's my best mechanisms. But power stances, great things. I'm always like, it takes 5 minutes. And don't worry if your mind does. Don't worry if it wanders off and stuff. You can hone it back in, bring it back in. It'll take 5 to 10 minutes before you actually. It took you a while to actually get into it. Yeah, it took me a long time. And build it up. Start by doing 5 minutes, then do 6 minutes, 7 minutes. Don't just go for a 20-minute meditation, because you'll never do it again.
Yeah, and so the key thing about it is it takes practice.
Yeah.
And don't get annoyed with yourself if your mind wanders.
Yeah.
That's perfectly
bring it back.
Oh no, I should have been going down.
Yeah, just go. That's fine, and bring it back.
And then you have to do 21 days or something before it becomes like a
28
routine.
days.
Is that the general thing?
And then
whatever
if
you
you
try.
can't do it up to that, then
To break a habit or change a habit, 28 days is the rough estimate time to.
So there's
to
hope
change
with my
something.
chocolate eating at night. Then.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, right.
I wouldn't
And
change
I
after the
never make
world.
Big changes if you're going to do something. Little increments is the best way to achieve anything.
Okay.
So yeah, meditation, power stances, great things.
With the power stances, actually, I do that before every job interview.
Yeah.
Yeah, I go to the bathroom, stand there like Superman.
Yeah.
Do a couple deep breaths and walk in.
And
It
there's one
works
thing, you
so
can put your
much,
hands in the air, like anything that opens you up big, proud and strong, your body naturally feels that, and it will release positive endorphins and all of this and that. Anything small, you're in a negative position, a stress position. And I think this is what's happens to a lot of young people these days, because we are on our phones so much. Without even realizing it, we're putting ourselves in a negative position. So we need to stop that. Power stances in schools, that's what people need to do. For job interviews, anything.
Yeah. Hold on, Gemma was going to jump in there, right, Gemma? Or you do a
I
power
mean,
stance?
I think, no, that was just, I can't hear anything about power stances without thinking about Grey's Anatomy. If anyone watches Grey's Anatomy, there's a character in that, and she does her before surgery power stance. So she was like,
But yeah, like the top billionaires, top big business people, anything before they go into big speeches. There's a lot of TED Talks on it. Have a little YouTube on them, and they really do help them.
Have you got any other power stances?
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple. So literally, hands on the hips is one.
Yeah.
Hands behind the head, and this one's great for your posture. What I like to do on this one is push my head
Standing
back
up,
into my
yeah.
arms. You don't have to stand up, but I like to stand up, or simply hands behind your back, anything like this, and hands in the air. These are all power stances. You may look silly, but I guarantee it will help and it'll make you feel better. So yeah, give it a go.
But then, obviously, for those of you who are listening to this,
Oh yes,
viewing
I
it,
forgot
viewing
it's
it,
not video.
Curtis probably has some YouTube video of him doing it.
I will. You know what? On my Instagram, I'm going to put some power stances.
There we go.
on.
You've said it now, you have to do it.
I'll put it in
and
there,
I'll put
yeah.
it on mine as well.
Yeah.
Think a superhero, Batman or Superman
Yeah.
or something standing up.
Hands on the hips,
Yeah.
wide base. That's what it is. Hands on the hips, wide base, shoulders back, and chin up.
Opening that chest.
Yeah.
Linda, have you noticed any change in attitudes in the entertainment industry regarding mental health?
Yeah, I think it's much more accepted now. I think years ago, if there was any kind of inkling that someone had a bit of mental health problems, they wouldn't be used on a job. Whereas now, you know, probably, I don't know if they do it on Strictly or on SAS, they've probably got some sort of mental health officer to talk.
You'd have to do
things.
every TV show now. You
Yeah.
have to do a psych, and
And
if you don't have
with Love
past the psych
Island.
value,
Yeah.
you're not doing the show.
So I think that people are putting in place things to help people. I think, as I say, it's much more accepted. You know, when you talk about it, you're not jeopardizing yourself getting the job. So I think we are going in the right direction in the entertainment industry.
I think the aftercare is something also. It's not just that pre. I'm going to do the TV show. You do the TV show, we'll forget about you. It's the aftercare that's improved, I think, the most. And unfortunately, due to suicide on shows like Love Island, that aftercare has been extended and it continues for fundamentally. If you
Rest of
need to
your
talk
life,
to
if
somebody
you
for
want
the rest of your
Yeah.
life,
We are very
It's
fortunate
covered.
in that way.
But I do think
Yeah.
that the programs that they're putting together are particularly healthy for mental health.
I think
You
it's the scenario of the way that it can be exacerbated by social media. It can, something so small can become something so big.
Yeah.
I go on the positive side as well. There's so many positives about social media, and I wouldn't want to just talk about the negatives, but sometimes the negatives outweigh the positives, especially when it's a personal thing.
And they're putting celebrities in scenarios that are really uncomfortable mentally.
Yeah, I'd say any TV and things like that is a very high stress situation because it is different than the real world. Even, for example, reality TV, they say it's reality. It's not, it's TV. So anybody that is listening that is fancying going that way, just remember it isn't real life and it's different. So go in open-minded.
Yeah.
And therefore...
Your friends and family know who you truly are.
Yeah.
But just a curious thing, AJ, you said that you do the psychological assessment beforehand.
Yeah.
And if you don't pass it, you don't get in. I don't know if I like the sound of that, because it should be in my mind that actually you do a psych assessment to recognize that we all have vulnerabilities, right? And we'll support you. So is it literally you wouldn't get on?
I think it's a very grey area. If they feel that for that TV program, perhaps a person isn't best suited for it, then they would say no. I don't think there is a you pass or you fail.
Yeah, because that was in.
Yeah, no, I think it's just they don't think that you mentally
perhaps
cope
you
with
are
what you're going to have to
It's a
face.
safer scenario, isn't it? You wouldn't want to be putting someone in a position that would be a detriment to their life, or wherever the show is. I don't know. Strictly would be a different cycle to doing a show like SAS Who Dares Wins, and you're putting yourself under different pressures. And I think most of the time, most people that go for these shows understand what the show is that is in front of them now. It's not hidden, it's talked about, and I think that's the positive side. So people know that they can ask for help in advance, and I think that's something that's the most positive thing. It's not something that like, oh, I'm not going to talk about it. It's like, well, you have to talk about it.
Yeah, because obviously if the message is if I say X, I won't get on. Well, people just will go, I won't say X. I'll just say something what I think I'll fake the test.
Or something, well, I'm not taking one. Well,
you're
not doing the show then, are you?
But it's great to see the longer term self-care, and that's really, really important.
What does the aftercare look like?
The aftercare is what you personally need as a person. Some people will need to talk to somebody maybe after a show to for that decompression zone. So we've just done SAS and we filmed this last year, but simple things that were put into place that you may not think of. We did the show and straight away we came off the show, we had to have 36 hours of decompression. And that was your phone's back in your hand again. You're back in a normal hotel room. You have to allow your body to relax before we'd even get on a flight to come home. Things that you wouldn't even think of. And then obviously, do you need to talk to somebody? Like, do you not need to? And just the phone calls, like it's like, oh, I'm never gonna hear from them again. Well, actually, you'd get a phone call 1 or 2 weeks later, being like, "Hi, how are you?" I literally had the producer
And
call me
then
the other day, and this is a year ago.
Yeah.
And she was like, "So on the episode, we're gonna have this. Just so you know, are you happy with this?" Preparing you for what's coming out. And knowing that you've got that support there to turn to if you do feel like you need it, it's so positive. It's so warm.
Yeah, I did Love Island so 4 years ago. It must have been now. I could still, if I wanted it, have aftercare up till now.
Yeah.
I could have it every single day if I wanted, and they would cover the costs. They would do it all.
And
So-
did you mentally cope with the attention, having sort of not been very well known and then coming out and
Truthfully, I loved it. If you want the honest truth, I like attention. I'm a performer. I like to be on stage. I love an audience in front of me, so I do love all of that aspect. But like when I was in there, I was going through. We had a big breakup, and it was quite a vital point of the show. So I went and spoke to a therapist in there, which was 24/7. We could go. So that's when I went and started
During the show.
during the show.
Okay.
So all of the shows we do, there is 24/7 care.
Yeah.
Whenever
If you need to talk to
feel
someone now,
you need to talk to somebody, you can do. Which I don't think it used to be like that.
Right, okay.
But now it is like that. And then after, you can have it as many times as a week as you want it, whenever you want it.
I think the hardest thing is with most of these scenarios that we talk about, it's like we talk about the person themselves, but actually the hardest scenario is the family that are around them. So if somebody's pregnant, you go ask the woman, how's it being pregnant? You don't ask the husband that's dealing with the scenario, like, oh, well, how are you doing actually? And I think that's the hardest thing in all these situations. Like you're in Love Island, you're fine, you're in a TV show, you're getting death threats and horrible things said to you. How does the family around you deal with that scenario when they feel it's so personal? It's so like they're saying about my child or my cousin, whoever it may be. That's sometimes something we don't ever think about, the wider circle that one person can affect thousands.
That ripple effect.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Craig, because we try and squeeze in our last question. If you want
Sorry,
to do
I
one more.
went Sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. It's all great.
One more question for you, AJ. Have you found it difficult dealing with health issues in the public eye?
It's hard because like you feel like you do so many TV shows, everything feel open and people feel like they've got a kind of like a hold on your life. Like they should be able to ask you a question like, how do you feel? And sometimes it's very hard to say, hey, that's a private matter, or I don't want to talk about it. For me, it's about being the one thing that I would say is being selfish, and selfish in the way that like I like my routine, I like going to the gym, I know what I do and I know what I'm good at, like, and being quite selfish with that and keeping that routine and not breaking it. When it comes down to certain things, like for example, the accident that happened with Abby, and unfortunately she got burnt, and dealing with that for my mental health, I became a full-time carer overnight because of the pandemic, like from making sure she took her 27 tablets a day, all through day and night, like having to clean her wounds every 2 hours for months on end, and like being thrown into these situations that you can't be prepared for. A, if I was a normal person, but B, being in the public eye, it was very hard. And I think the one thing for me, like Curtis saw me, it got to the point where I couldn't be a hypocrite and say like, you need help, you need to talk to somebody, and then not be at the point where I was at my lowest, like I've never thought I'd ever be in my life, not even being able to talk because I was that just stuck in a corner in a room, and actually having to talk to somebody, and then actually now talking about it publicly, I know is helping other people that would be in that scenario. So I try and use it as a positive and try and forget about all the negative, dark sides. But knowing that I've had them really dark times, it allows me to help other people and kind of find the light, maybe.
It's real swings and roundabout situation because you get so much positivity and support from people, and then you do also get the opposite as well. So it really is swings and roundabouts.
And my one point is, I don't want to judge if somebody's going to write a bad comment or say something to my face, I don't want to judge them for what they've said, because I personally don't know what position they are in their life, and I wouldn't want to say something or do something that would maybe push them over the edge. And that's how I deal with this kind of, not disconnect, but that's how I deal with it. That may not be right for other people, but I know that works for me.
And sometimes it is trying to just sometimes not talk about it at all, like, and keep it out. For example, if you want your private life, so let's say relationships, things like that, just don't put it out there. Try not to talk about it. Don't put it on social media, things like that, really. And that's a way of just trying to keep it as private as you can.
Easier said than done.
But yeah, a lot easier said than done.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, a really important message. The other thing you slipped in there as well, AJ, was the importance of exercise for you. Because actually, exercise didn't come up when we were in the conversation there, and I think it's such. Well, we did in this sort of.
I go
wild
to the gym
footing.
every morning.
Yeah, it's so
more
important.
for mental than physical.
Yeah.
If I don't go to the gym in the morning, mentally I struggle.
Yeah,
it's a mental thing for me.
In July, we spoke to MQ ambassador and cricket star Azeem Rafiq to talk about racism in sport, having a winner's mindset, and using religion to improve your mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, because I saw you many times on the TV and elsewhere, obviously over the last couple of years, and I just think incredibly powerful testimony. And sometimes I wondered what was keeping you so strong and how you were so strong throughout it. And so I think what you've done has been incredible and remarkable. But it's only one aspect, as we know from mental health research. The impact of racism and discrimination on people's mental health it's everywhere we look, sadly, and it's something we need to do much more on, is really trying to look at what not only, of course, we have to tackle it, should be zero tolerance, but then do more to support people who are experiencing racism and discrimination. I think we have a long road ahead still. So I think just huge thanks for the ongoing. I know you're continuing to do this, and with the work that you do also for MQ. So maybe then actually, see, maybe if we can chat a bit about, because that links to the sort of the impact of racism and discrimination on your own mental health, but how you're now using that you're an ambassador, obviously, for MQ, and we're delighted that you are. So do you maybe tell us about how you got involved in being an ambassador, and sort of what you've been doing with that role?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the nice parts of the 2 years. MQ was the only organization that actually just got in touch with me and just, Bryony, and just, are you all right? Can we help in any way? And that, it came at a time where I was seriously struggling, to be honest. I was finding the whole thing really challenging. I felt incredibly let down from community organizations that talk about equality, diversity, inclusion, and you see a lot on social media and some high-profile ones. And I felt incredibly let down because not one organization got in touch with me to see if I was all right. Yet I saw at different stages there was a lot of organizations that were willing to jump on to Yorkshire and help them out. And that hurt. This is one of the things that hurts me the most on a given day, most days. And when I got that, when Bryony got in touch, and I had the Zoom with her and Leigh, and it was honestly, from on a human level, it was like, oh my God, someone does care that I exist. Mm-hmm. And that was massive for me. I don't think I've even told them as much as like I am today. It made a huge difference to me. And I've got, obviously, moving forward, mental health is something that I've suffered with, and I know the impacts of to my mental health from discrimination, racism, and going through the process that I have. And I want to try. The whole point of me speaking out was to make sure that experience, first and foremost, the experience that I went through no one else goes through. But if there's people out there, and well, there's no if about it, there's people out there struggling, is try and help them and support them. And from a mental health point of view, to get involved with MQ, and then when I got asked to be an ambassador, it was honestly, it meant the world to me. And hopefully moving forward, we can work together in going deeper into why it affects sort of non-white people more, looking at different cultures. From a South Asian point of view, is still a taboo subject, and it's trying to get more awareness, trying to get the community to engage into it more, and actually getting into that research and trying to find ways that we can sort of support people more, so that they can try because I think it's the thing that everyone struggles with, but it's just helping them support in a way that so they can manage it in a better way.
Yeah, no, but just reflecting on what you've just said there, Asim, and I think that, and that's I'm so pleased that Bryony and Leigh and MQ reached out to you, and that, but the importance of in your case, in that you're in the eye of the storm and you're feeling even more isolated, and we know that sort of sense of being isolated, that sense of being trapped, that sense of seeing no options are just so detrimental to your mental health, and so it's something we all should be thinking about. It doesn't matter who we are, that we can support each other, and it is that reaching out. And I think you've also highlighted that small things that all of us can do can make one heck of a difference. And just somebody in that right moment, that moment when you needed somebody, because obviously they didn't have to reach out to you, and that they did, and that just meant so much to you. I think that's just so incredible.
One, they didn't have to reach out. Second, they didn't even know me. And honestly, the timing of it was, and again, I'm a massive believer that was from Allah, and the timing of it, and it really made a difference. And it's the little things that make a big difference. And like we're fasting right now, Ramadan, and this year I was in an event last night as well, an iftar event. But this year, more people have wished Ramadan Kareem. I was at an event at Man City, and the people were like, "This is the first time it's happened." My colleagues are asking me, "Am I spelling this right? I want to wish people Ramadan Kareem." And it might be a very small thing for someone wishing it non-Muslim, but to us, this month has been incredible. It's been, for the first time living in this country, it's felt like it's like people are actually interested and care. That it's such a big month for us as Muslims, and they want to support you in any way they can and celebrate it as well. So yeah, it's been really nice.
Do you find that a lack of understanding is the reason why racism is so prevalent? Is the lack of understanding between different cultures, different people, is the reason why there are so many perceived differences?
Yeah, I mean, look, education and lack of understanding is huge. I mean, I can talk about 2 days after DCMS, some of my old anti-Semitic messages that I'd put on Facebook came out, and they hurt me. They hurt me because, one, for 2 years, I've been like, if I was from the Jewish community, they wouldn't have been allowed to do this to me, because the Jewish community stay strong together. Why am I not getting the support from my community? But actually, to see that I clearly said them things, it hurt me. But where did they come from? I didn't even know there was actually why it was offensive. Until I went and met Jewish people. I went to the Jewish Museum, and I continued to do that to try and understand myself why it is that I might have said that. So I think it's because we're not spending enough time in each other's spaces. We are not educating ourselves enough about each other's culture, and the positives and the nice bits about each other's cultures, and spending time with and celebrating everyone's sort of faith, religion, and something that means a lot to them, celebrating that with each other. With that comes understanding, and with understanding, you'd hope that sort of the comments or situations that have been happening would happen less. You would think so, but obviously it's hard to sit there and say that for definite. But I genuinely do believe it comes from a lack of understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, because I'm just thinking, when you're speaking there, Asim, about I'm from Northern Ireland, and I know it's different, but that you mentioned this idea of common spaces and contributing to, or not having common spaces, contributing then to the lack of understanding. But that's part of what's happened in Northern Ireland. And as I grew up in this place called Derry Girls, as you may have heard on Channel 4 at the minutes, but But in Derry, but the point is, that one part of the river, people at one part of the river, side of the River Foyle runs up the middle of Derry, tend to be Catholic, and the people on the other side of the river tend to be Protestant. And I grew up, and I went to Catholic school, and you didn't mix with Protestants. We just, so whatever knowledge we had was about the other religion was gained, not by seeing them regularly, but by what you heard on the news or saw in the papers. And then obviously there's a conflict going on. But I just to reiterate, I know it's different from what you've experienced, obviously completely, but there's that sense of, if we're going to solve any of these issues in society, it's coming together. So we do have an understanding, realize that sense of common humanity. We're all the same. We're all the same. Doesn't matter what your religion, creed, color, whatever it is, we're all the same ultimately. So I think that's a really powerful point that you make. It seems so. No, thanks again for that.
According to the data, 12 in every 1,000 people have OCD. We sat down with mental health activist and author Lily Bailey to talk about the misconceptions about OCD, whether writing can be cathartic, and the potential future of OCD treatments.
So I have OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and I've had it ever since I can remember, really, but I didn't know what it was for a long time. I think I got my diagnosis when I was 16, and so I spent a lot of my childhood and teenage years living with this thing and sort of thinking, gosh, does everyone think like this? And if so, how are they getting stuff done? Or is there something really wrong with me? But probably I should keep quiet about it, because my OCD tended to center around harm. I would have obsessions that I might harm someone, or that I might have done something wrong. And then my compulsions in response would tend to sort of be to kind of try and neutralize those fears by maybe like repeating a phrase in my head, or sort of analyzing the actions, ruminating. People often don't know that mental rumination can be a compulsion. And I definitely didn't know that. So I'd spend a lot of time analyzing my actions and trying to work out if I really was a monster. I had a lot of intrusive thoughts, sort of like, oh, I want to kill my dog, or I want to kill my family, which I really didn't want to do. They're ego dystonic, so they went against my values. But I didn't know that. And I thought if I told anyone about that, maybe I'd just get taken to prison or locked away. And yeah, so it was really frightening, actually.
And so you're saying that, but when do you first remember experiencing those thoughts? You mentioned 16 there.
Well, 16 was, when it sort of came to a head. I basically got so unwell with it that I decided that if I lay in bed and just kept completely still, then I wouldn't do things wrong, and that would be the best way to cope. And that was the point where people around me realized something was wrong. But yeah, I remember having it from a very young age. I guess like an example of that might be when I was in reception, a teacher put a note in our backpack, and I became convinced that this letter was a letter to my parents saying all the things I'd done wrong. So I went out of my way to destroy this letter and bin it. It was actually a letter telling us that there was going to be a fancy dress day. So then I was the only kid who came in not in fancy dress. That's like quite a strong memory I have, and it's probably also reinforced by the fact that other people in my family remember it.
Mm-hmm.
But just a real sense that I was going to be in trouble, that I'd done something terrible, and I needed to atone for it, or make it right, or ask the person if I'd hurt them, or hide the evidence depending on how I was feeling on that day. So and also I would apologize as a compulsion too. So that would be happening from a very young age. I'd be sort of brushing against someone and being like, oh, I'm sorry, did I hurt you? Because in my mind, I'd sort of picture their bones all crunched up inside, that I'd really injured them, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because I remember I read, I think it's something a few years ago in an interview you did in The Guardian, and I think you talked about if you brushed beside or against somebody, then that would be a letter. That would be B. Or if they had somebody banged into somebody's arm. So could you tell us a bit about that? So that you would then repeat these letters? Is that what it was, or? So
initially, in my sort of younger memories, it's this sort of vague fear that I've done something wrong, I've got to fix it. As I got older, I sort of developed more complicated compulsions, and one of them was when I was around the age of sort of 12, 13. I realized that I could, at the time, it's interesting because at the time I was like, oh, I've solved it. Because again, I didn't know I had OCD. I was like, this is a good way to deal with it, but actually it was just a further compulsion. So what I would do is, so say I thought I maybe stared at someone's bum, I'd take the letter B, put it on my list, and then maybe say I thought I hurt their arm because I brushed, I brushed against them. I might take the letter A for arm. And then say I worried I came too close to someone and I smelt bad, I could take the letter S for smell. And then I'd be like BAS, BAS, BAS. And this would go on throughout the day. So in the end, I could have like hundreds of letters on my list, and I'd sort of review them all at nighttime and determine which one was like red. If it was red, then I had to carry it forward and continue thinking about it. If it was green, I could dismiss it, let it go. And then there'd sort of be like a reshuffling, and the whole process would begin again the next day.
And then when you're processing throughout the day, then you were working out whether this would still be, would be, you could dismiss it as a green, or if it would still, it still needed work, or what way was that? What was going through your head in terms of the green and red?
Green is, this action was not so bad, I can move on from it. Red is, this action was pretty bad and it needs to be ruminated about a bit more. During the day though, I'd mostly sort of be stockpiling and doing some sort of loose rumination of actions. And then in the evening and nighttime, that was when, like, I don't know, I like basically like sent myself to my own court or something. I laugh, but it was pretty awful.
It must be exhausting. Utterly exhausting.
I can imagine. Yeah, very difficult, especially for a child to go through.
Yeah, well, it is. It's really lonely when you don't know why this is happening to you, or what it is, or what's going on.
Yeah. And at that age, then, so you didn't share this with anybody at that stage?
I think I did. I would sometimes ask my mum for some kind of reassurance, and I was quite secretive, and because a lot of it, because it was happening so much in my head, I think people just thought that I was a bit of a daydreamer, that kind of thing. But I did ask my mum, like I would try to sort of confess to her some of the intrusive thoughts I'd had. And I think it came from a good place. She was just trying to reassure me. She'd say sort of like, oh, everyone has those thoughts. And I can see why she responded in that way. But if I did try, I think because it was so much worse in my head than it was externally, if I tried to sort of explain, it would sort of be dismissed as, oh, everyone thinks that sometimes, that kind of thing.
And then because of course, as a parent, what you're trying to do is do whatever you can to reassure your loved ones. And do you have any siblings?
Yeah, I have a younger sibling. She's 5 years younger than me. Yeah,
so you're unable then to talk to your sibling, your sister about it then? I mean, I'm just thinking when stuff happened to me in the past, I have an identical twin brother, so I always had him there to make sort of sense of the world with. But I suppose if your sibling is 5 years younger, I
didn't want to sort of bother her with it. And I do actually speak to her about it now. We're adults. It's quite a different relationship. And actually, interestingly, she went through various stages of having quite bad compulsions, and probably what would be clinically diagnosed as OCD, although she never got a diagnosis. And when she was going through that, I was able to sort of like pass on what I'd learned about OCD and therapy, and like how you can work with this thing to her. But yeah, we've both been through quite compulsive periods in our lives.
Was it difficult to get a diagnosis? Because I know you were saying that you first, like the symptoms were when you was quite young, but you got a diagnosis at 16. Was it quite difficult to actually get that diagnosis?
I mean, I think the difficulty was that, like, the period before the crisis point, because I wasn't really, I'm not blaming myself, but I wasn't really conveying what was going on. So it wasn't kind of clear that there was a problem. And I mean, I think OCD is really misunderstood and often not picked up. No one around me picked up on it. My teachers didn't. There would be certain things that would be picked up on. Like I would cry in lessons if I got a question wrong. And in the end, my parents ended up getting called into the school to like talk about whether there was something going on at home. But they didn't kind of focus on the fact that what was happening was that my compulsions were getting so bad I was crying. Like there was sort of inching towards it, but it didn't quite happen. From the moment that I stopped getting out of bed and was sent to a GP, actually my experience was really good, because my GP instantly recognized that what I was going through was, because I then explained it to her. She said, "Oh, that's OCD." And I was really surprised, because I sort of had grown up with all of the stereotypes around OCD, and I was like, "Well, I'm really messy." But she explained to me how my thinking fit that obsessive compulsive pattern, and how OCD can kind of be about anything. And from that period, from then on, actually my experience was really good.
Was that at 16 then, or what age did you go to speak to your GP?
That was when I was 16.
Yeah, 16.
Yeah.
And so then because obviously not getting out of bed might be one of the obviously symptoms of depression as well.
Yeah. Well, the thing that enabled her to say, no, this is what, because I mean, I don't know why I felt comfortable to speak to her on that particular day. I think it had just really reached an absolute crisis point. Maybe it helped that she was not someone I knew. And she's sort of more than saying, like, why, like, she sort of said, well, what's going on? Why, like, in your head? And so I described the process, and that was, I think, how she sort of realized that it was OCD.
In June, we spoke to MQ ambassador and researcher Gemma Styles about the prevalence of eating disorders, including people with lived experience in research, and improving your mental health through yoga. So, James, what is your image of the future of mental health research?
I have like a grand plan. So I'll give you the edited highlights. I'll give you some highlights. I think that we need to have this sort of cultural openness to the new, and to, like we've talked about, diverse voices and diverse experiences, and sort of letting go of thinking that we know it all already, and thinking that, we have this book. I like to think of it as a book about, this is what we know about mental health. I don't have my book with me, but I sometimes use it as an example. And we've kind of done the first couple of pages, but we actually don't know it all. And if you drill down into that, research doesn't include huge swathes of people who experience things that are emerging, even as we sort of speak, the sort of prevalence of different things are changing. And we need to be able to sort of be flexible to accommodate changes in a rapidly changing world, to write the rest of this book and to keep finishing off this topic that will never be finished, because the world will keep changing, the social world, the environment and everything, but to continue sort of writing and creating that knowledge that we have about mental health, whether that's illness, whether that's actual health, which is something that I think should be a priority. What is it to be well? That's going to vary for different people and cultures and different stages of life, all kinds of things. And also thinking about, what works in terms of treatment and recovery for who. And so I suppose if we're honest about, we only know, these first few pages, then we've got to create the rest of this knowledge together. Then the second question is, well, who's going to write that, and who's going to be involved in the creation of that? And for me, one of my big priorities for mental health research is, how can we keep building on these structures of involving and integrating lived experience into research, and how can that be supported? Those structures be supported. People need paying for their time. People need emotional support. People need training. It's not an unskilled kind of job. And then also sort of thinking about, well, what is the role and expertise that comes from lived experience? And I still think this is something that we also don't know completely. Like, I think it's still a work in progress, and I'm always really upfront about that. Any piece of work that I do, I think, we've got to leave a bit of space for evaluating, how did this integration of lived experience work? Because we're still working out, who do we want to be involved? That matters, but how does it matter? When do we want them involved in the research process? What do we want them to do? Which bits of their experience do we want to know about? Is it them telling their story, and then the researcher takes bits of the story and applies it in that way? Or is it the person applying their experience to the piece of work? Yeah, and I still don't think we have it very well defined. We just have this thing of like lived experience. At the worst end, I've seen it, and I challenge it. I think it's that tick box thing, or we'll go and get some lived experience. Research teams will have all their projects set up from the beginning without lived experience involvement, perhaps, and then realize, oh, we need to go and get some lived experience, as though it's something you just pull off the shelf and have a little bit of it in your project, sprinkle it on for seasoning, and then sort of carry on. And actually, it's sort of, no, can it be participatory? Can it be reciprocal, so that people with lived experience are getting something out of it? I once was asked a question by a member of an audience of an event: should people with lived experience be named as co-authors? And I was kind of like, if they wrote it, if they contributed, why not? That's such a weird question. And so, there's some hierarchies and power and that kind of stuff going on there. But I think that those are my sort of priorities. It's sort of having a responsive system to a changing world, and having that sort of range of people involved in creating the knowledge that we have. And maybe there are specific priorities within that. I'm always going to be like eating disorders, neurodiversity, disability, hypermobility, genetics, because these are things that I'm interested in from my own experience. But there are, people will have different and sometimes competing priorities. We've got to do our best to sort of serve them all, I guess. So yeah, those are my main things. But I think in terms of the lived experience stuff, we could do much more sort of grassroots research. I can't just set up a qualitative research thing myself if I'm not attached to a university, for example. But I have the skills and the knowledge to go and do research in the field or whatever, and where does that go? Could there be a specific journal for lived experience? Can there be a process of getting ethics for people who are not attached to an institution which comes with so many privileges, but, which I didn't have for a very long time? So I think being creative has to be at the heart of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No, I think that point about the pragmatics of it, like ethics, is a really important message. And I don't think we have a solution for that yet, except partnering with other organizations. Except I suppose some Samaritans as an organization have their own internal board, but you need the connections with them, I suppose. But no, I really important stuff. I love your vision, though. I think it's an excellent vision, which if we can meet even some of that, James will be doing really well.
In our third episode, we spoke to cyclist and Guinness World Record holder Leigh Timmis about self-improvement, finding your purpose, and breaking records.
Have you ever heard of that philosophy? It's a Japanese philosophy called Ikigai.
It sounds familiar.
There was a book that was popular about it about 2-3 years ago, something like that. And it's the Japanese word for purpose or meaning. And this book talks about, those Venn diagrams where there's circles are overlapping. Mm-hmm. So there's these four things in life. And if you can find the job that incorporates them all and they overlap, then you find your purpose in the world. So those circles were something you love, something you're good at, something you can make money from, and something the world needs. And if you can find the job that incorporates all of those, they all overlap, then you found your purpose. And the really interesting one there is the thing that the world needs for me. You could say you were a guitarist and you were really good at it and you enjoyed it and you made money from it. I think if you weren't sharing it, if you weren't on stage letting people listen to it or teaching people how to play the guitar themselves, it would almost become kind of meaningless just to sit at home playing the most amazing guitar in the world, but not sharing it with people. I think that we kind of have to. So I really enjoy that work that I do in schools. I enjoy going out and speaking at corporate events. So, it's a nice way that you can make money from your experiences, but also all of this stuff that I put myself through. Somebody once described it as, they said I should do a PhD because I'm basically putting myself through a load of tests, finding some results, and I could create some really interesting papers from it.
Dissertation.
Yeah, I am. And it's so weird. I'm the product at the end of all of this. It's a very weird concept, but everything that I learn, I really hope others can learn from it as well. Mm-hmm. These tools aren't just to become a great cyclist, they're to overcome your own problems. And those basic ones that we talked about today, the sleep, the creating zones, the organization, they're the things that you need to do to make yourself great at anything. Everyone's got their own passion. And you become good at it because, the 10,000 hour rule, you do something purposeful practice, 10,000 hours, you become a master at it. That's driven out of practice, that becomes your talent. But there's thousands of people who have become so good at it. And you've just got to build the foundations. Like we called it an elite athlete's lifestyle, becoming so good at those other small things that then you push your talent much higher just on that solid foundation. So yeah.
So going back to purpose, would you say that you found yours?
I yes,
Okay.
yeah, I do feel like I found my purpose, but I also feel like my purpose over time will change. There are other aspects that I need to build into my life. I've talked about, achieving those targets, and what I've tended to do through life to achieve these great things is sacrifice other areas. So I'll sacrifice time with friends, I'll sacrifice time with family, I'll sacrifice my own personal time. I'll wake up at 6 in the morning, I'll be training until 9, then I'm at work, and then from 6 until 9, I'm working hard, I'll maybe fit in some food, and then I'll go to bed and I'll get up the next day and repeat again, and not leave enough time to just sit and, I love to sit and read a book, watch a film, or spend time with friends. So this time we're looking at that. We've broken down my life into these different areas, and every week I've got to make sure that I'm doing something in each area, and I monitor the stress within each one as well. So on that work level, if stress is going to be high there, I can't have a high level of stress in my athletic training as well. Or if I have got it in both, I've got to make sure that I've got less stress the week after, so I've got time to recover. I think there's a lot of areas that we need to look at, because no matter what you want to be, whether you want to be a great filmmaker or a great cyclist or whatever, it's the human behind that person that has to be amazing. They've got to be happy, they've got to be motivated. And we've talked about having that pot of energy that you've got, and when it's depleted, you can't give any more. What you can do is top it up with positive experiences, which is the things that I've sacrificed. So more time with friends, so that when you're in that difficult situation, you've got those great things to look back on, those 3 things that you're grateful for from the previous day. I did get to spend that time with Craig. We had that wicked conversation, or, I spent some time with my mum and we went out and we did that trampolining or whatever. I don't know. Can't imagine my mum on a trampoline, but yeah, there's different areas where you can invest a bit of energy to get a greater outcome. And I think that, there's a lot of things to learn about that.
It puts you in such a unique situation in terms of the fact that you have so many people around you that help monitor aspects of your life to make you better, and also in a way that you found your purpose. There's people, I guess, who go their whole life and still at the end feel a bit confused to what their purpose in life was. And for someone, so early on in their life to find this, that's amazing.
Yeah, you know what though? It's a really difficult one, because people have said that to me before. And I think anybody could go out and just start walking a path towards what they want to do. And you might not be 100% sure what you want to do. Oh, maybe I do, maybe I don't. Well, just try it. Because if it's not the right thing for you, you at least won't be in the same position, and you can choose another route and then try that, and you'll always be learning. It's an easy thing to say. It's a difficult thing to do, because you kind of have to sacrifice. You have to give up comfort, and you have to give up a nice salary, like all those kinds of things. What I think happened in my life is I got to that point where I'd kind of hit rock bottom, struggling with depression, wasn't happy. I'd achieved all of those amazing successes, I ticked all of the boxes, and it wasn't working for me. And there was this catalyst, a moment when I got to ride a motorbike across Iceland with 2 people that I worked with, and suddenly my eyes were opened, like this landscape of like National Geographic magazine pages of volcanoes and deserts and glaciers and rivers of hot water and bubbling mud, and we were just riding motorbikes across this island, and we'd wild camp in the middle of nowhere. It was just the 3 of us, and I came back after that amazing adventure and went, I've got one life, and the way I'm leading it is not fulfilling.
Yeah.
I've got nothing to lose. What would you do if you had got one life, you want to use it? What do you want to do? And because I had nothing to lose, I just went for it. And it started with travel. I didn't dive straight into riding a bike around the world. I backpacked. I was going to be a snowboarder. That's what I thought I wanted to do. I went to New Zealand. But within months, I'd fallen off, broken my collarbone, and that was that game over. But, I'd started walking the path. I loved to travel. I traveled a bit more around Southeast Asia. Then I lived in Canada. And I loved meeting people. I just, new landscapes, new people, new cultures. It was brilliant. And I linked that up with the motorbike and the bike from when I was young. And I found something that I thought would work, and I just went for it and cycled around the world. Now, I think a lot of things all link up, from something I loved as a kid, something that I was enjoying at the time, the fact that I didn't have any commitments to, I'd given it all up to go and start traveling. And so I could just go out and do it. So when people say, yeah, you're really lucky, I did have to go through this really traumatic experience. Going through depression at that time was a horrible experience. I would never want anyone to hate their life, think, what is the point of going on? The world's better off without me. All of those horrible thoughts. But it put me in a position to go, you know what, let's make a world that I do want to live in. Let's go and do this. So when people turn to me, they're like, you're so lucky to have been able to do that. Well, the flip side of the coin is, I wasn't so lucky to have had the thing that started it. It's a difficult one when you have got things that you would have to sacrifice. If I'd started now, it'd be much more difficult because, there's a house and there's a community around me and stuff like that. Or if you had kids, you can't just run away. But all you can do is start from where you're at and do things that are accessible at that time as well within the situation that you're in. So, yeah, I think anyone has the opportunity to do it, but it's a difficult one to do.